Feels good though.
And we're back. It's been a long time. Dixon, how you doing, my friend?
Well, I've aged about 25 years, so the back, the sciatica, all
Getting
that.
old. So I
Yeah,
thought
yeah, yeah.
I
The
want to.
grandkids are really keeping me my spirits up though.
Oh
Go
man,
on.
it's hard living, hard living. So
Hmm.
this week we're going to pick up. We're going to slightly go in a new direction because I think we've had quite a few mass shootings in the last couple weeks, and I wanted to discuss it this week. It was
Mm,
something Dixon I said, I really
including
want
one
to talk.
last night.
Yeah, well, I spent a lot of time doing some reading last night, and I wanted to go about this conversation, not in the way that I think everybody's had it. And I think I've said before on the show, I get really frustrated with the liberals versus conservatives, and anytime anybody refers to the right or the left in an argument, I kind of recoil a bit because you're losing all sense of context. And I think I've said, and you've said, I think people who've watched us would know that we're not necessarily advocates of of the Second Amendment, I guess is the best way to frame it so that it connects to popular culture. And I thought, all right, I want to look at this problem differently. I live in the United Kingdom, and my views have evolved quite a bit in the last 15 years. I think when I moved over here, I was in that crowd where my view was the gun is, it's not guns, it's a whole thing. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. And I think a lot of that
Right.
was me defending my culture and my heritage because you don't realize how interlinked guns are in with American society until you go outside of your country and you speak to people who talk to you about what their perceptions of America are.
They think everybody's packing heat everywhere they go all the time.
Well, they and we've, I think, again, I've spoken about it before. There's people I've spoken to who are thinking twice about their trips to America because they are worried they're going to get shot. And there's going to be people that listen to this that are thinking that's absolutely ridiculous. But it's something that I think just bears knowing that there is a perception from other countries. And I wanted to take a look at this problem in sort of a steel man way. I wanted to look at the best arguments for gun control. And there's some that for the Second Amendment. And I've got a collection of clips that are things that I thought, yeah, I can connect to that. There's things that I've got that we're going to look at that I think are totally idiotic. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a step back and look at it again. I want to get your thoughts on it, but I want us really to look at this conversation from the perspective of, all right, we don't have a view, or we're giving that point of view a chance. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a good way of approaching the subject. Because I agree, coming at everything with a preset framework. First of all, you turn people off. I think one thing that I get frustrated with, and I'm unabashedly, on the left. There's no question about that. But I sometimes think, I'm trying to remember who it was that I saw who said it, and they said it nicely, that people on the left seem to forget sometimes that we're still in the persuasion business, or, you should be if you're trying to voice a platform or an idea that you want to get people to get behind. And, you don't get there by bludgeoning them or showing,
Yeah.
just like, you will agree with me, blah, 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 or showing people disrespect. You have to meet people where they are and then try to, ask them, first of all, I mean, listen, I'm an organizer, and you learn tactics about how to, and I say tactics like, you're manipulating somebody. It's not that. It's like, how do you have an effective conversation with somebody
Yeah.
so that they're not turned off to a new idea, whatever the new idea is, whether it's, I have a political idea for you, or how about you buy this lamp that I'm selling? You know what I mean? The first thing that you got to do is figure out, do they need a lamp?
Yeah.
Or, what, not even so much do they need a lamp, but do they, what is their general feeling towards lamps? You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing, and you build the conversation from finding out a little bit about them, about what they value, about what their needs might be.
Yeah.
And then you try to connect those needs and feelings to things that you think can help. That's all.
Well, let's start in that vein because I think the first thing I want to do is show a clip that, and I spent a lot of time. I spent the better part of 3 hours last night and the better part of the last couple of weeks just sort of relearning this topic from the perspective of an American. And I was talking to my wife and I was steel manning, I guess, the conversation with her, just trying to back up why people in America feel like, guns are a right, why it's a question of liberty, and it is a question of safety. And I think where I always, and just to explain to anybody watching this who is a supporter of, I'm going to use this as a terminology of people that maybe are for, let's say arming teachers, things of that nature. It's not meant to be derogatory or anything like that, but people who support the Second Amendment. I think that's a bullshit way to frame it, but I think would you say that that's a good way to get that sort of camp identified in this conversation?
You mean the phrase "people who support the Second Amendment"?
Yeah, I'm trying to identify people that are opposed to gun regulation, opposed to gun control, people who don't, want to focus on the gun or the tool is the issue. To me, that would be, I would label that, for the sake of this conversation, as supporters of the Second Amendment.
I actually think that's a little. I think that there are more than we realize people who support the Second Amendment, if what one means by that is I should be allowed to have certain kinds of guns for certain kinds of reasons.
Okay.
But not necessarily like people who would support things like, universal and instant background checks, and maybe limiting guns in terms of the magazines and like how many bullets they can fire in a given period. I think you'd find that there are people who are in that, in that area. So, so if you're trying to target the people who, in other words, who want guns without restriction, I would say guns without restriction. If you're trying to say people who are generally supportive of the idea that some degree of private ownership of guns is okay, and then we then have to decide at what level, that's where I would say supporters of the Second Amendment.
Well, when we say target, I want to involve, I want to engage as opposed to target. And that got an unfortunate
targets, maybe, target, that's not that. Okay.
For the sake of the conversation, that's an unfortunate term. However, I want to the reason I want to I guess frame this is that I think the problem I have with this conversation as a starter is when we look at, let's say, arming teachers, adding more guns to the fold, open carry, the thing I can't escape and the thing that I don't understand, so I'm speaking to you, let's say, gun advocates. When you add more of something like a gun, you are creating more opportunities for people to be killed, for greater levels of homicides, for any sort of thing to happen along those lines. And I don't quite understand that. And what I don't understand is when we talk about the right to bear arms and the right to defend yourself and the right to keep you safe, where does that line cross to where people who don't have guns have a right to not be killed? Because there is a statistical problem here with more guns and the number of deaths. And in looking, the first clip I'm going to show is from somebody I subscribe to called Nick Rekieta. He's a lawyer who streams court trials. He's funny. He's a good presenter. And he framed this conversation in a way that I don't agree with, but it makes sense as far as it sort of connects that. It almost identifies that, yeah, more guns mean people will die. I don't agree with this, but I appreciate how it's framed. And I want to look at this as sort of a foundation for this conversation. So I'm going to share my screen in the high level of production quality I wasn't prepared for. Let me get this on. And I'm just going to share a few minutes from this. Let me know if you can hear it, Dixon.
Okay.
Why isn't it sharing? There we are.
The tragedy of
Can you hear that?
Yes.
children being killed or people being killed will never be undone. There's no law that can fix it. There's no regulation that can bring it back. And there's nothing you can do to prevent it. If it's not a gun, it's a knife.
I'm done already.
Bat.
So,
nope. I'm sorry. I can't even with him. No.
why don't you? Because what I'll say is, here's what I'm connecting with. So before we start going ape shit, what I'm connecting with is there has to be, at least if I'm in this conversation, an identification that if we're embracing gun culture as we are in the U.S., it's a messy problem and people will die. And that's an honest assessment. Whereas every time I hear this argument, there's no identification.
He evaded. Wait. No. He evaded right at the outset. He is full of shit, and I can't stand it already. He started with this idea that, if it's not a gun, it'll be a knife. How many people can you kill in 30 seconds with a knife? How many people can you kill in 30 seconds with an AR-15 with a 30, 50, 70 bullet magazine or whatever you can alter it to have stock wise. That is so ludicrous. And he is absolutely abdicating any responsibility whatsoever. He's an asshole for saying that, period. Here is the deal. You want to say, look, I'm willing to sit here and go, put forward a reasonable argument. This is all you've got. You have to say, unfortunately, the reality is freedom comes at a cost. It is too much of an encroachment on individual freedoms and rights, whether it's because we need to be able to organize militias to overthrow the government if we feel like it, or simply because the individual sovereignty is the absolute paramount virtue that must be respected, vis-a-vis my own personal belief or how I read the Declaration of Independence or how I read the Constitution, whatever or what have you, that whatever that circumstance is, that the cost of violating that, the absolute individual sovereignty, that must be preserved at all costs. And if it means that children will be massacred from time to time, that is the price we pay. That is honest. That is honest. Do not tell me about a goddamn knife.
I'm going to start this. We're going to continue with it because I have a few thoughts on this and I want to get through the, hold on to that. Let's get through this first. I want to hear this first.
Not most of the time, not some of the time, always trumps casualty. Liberty is risk, and it always trumps casualty.
I mean, okay, that's fair. There we go.
Being killed will never be undone.
Because there's a point he makes. I don't agree with this either, but what I want to do is I want to engage these ideas.
I would like to have 7 of his children shot in front of him and then hear him tell me that. But go on.
Let's let him finish what he's going to say.
There's no law that can fix it. There's no regulation that can bring it back. And there's nothing you can do to prevent it. If it's not a gun, it's a knife. If it's not a knife, it's a bat. If it's not a bat, it's strangling.
Stay strong.
It's bare hands. It's a bomb. It's a car. It's something.
And we are going to get into all of these things, but I want to get the full context of the quote.
Tragedy, atrocity, these are terrible things. But the reality is that liberty will always trump tragedy. It will always trump security, because there is no greater security of the individual than individual liberty to secure themselves. And I know that's really hard because it's really fucking emotional. I get it. I get it. Every time it happens, my heart aches. I'm a dad. I know what I can see it. I can see the phone call, the news report, right? It's the one thing I'm afraid of in this entire world is your child not coming home. But individual security,
I don't know how a father can say that.
the individual liberty always trumps a government promise of security. And how do we know? How do we know? What was the actual problem at that school?
Excuse making. Disgusting. Disgusting.
What was the actual problem? Where was the security? Where was the government who promises to protect those kids? They didn't do it. They didn't do it at the school. They didn't do it before the guy got to the school.
With gun control that you won't allow, asshole. Oh, enough.
Individuals from going in.
So when I look
that
at
is
this,
so catastrophically stupid. I can't stand it. Your liberty can kiss my hairy ass.
Here's what I think. Here's what I think, and this is how I want to engage this conversation. A little bit. And you're welcome.
A little bit calmer.
I want to understand these points of view because I'm trying to dispel my views, which are very along the lines of what you're saying. Because I think there's a false equivalency when we start talking about knives, when we start talking about explosives and things like that. But he's framed the conversation that at least is honest about the fact that this is messy and people will die. So I'm just looking at the framework of the message. And I don't think he's being disingenuous. I think this is his genuine view.
Oh no, I believe that. I believe
Yeah.
that he believes that. I
And I
can't
don't
imagine.
think-
I can't imagine what kind of jerk would have to get on the air and say that, knowing that he's a father.
Well,
And like, really, it's really more important to you that random citizen X carry around an AR-15 with 50 rounds of ammunition than it is that your son and everybody else's son can go to school and not have to worry about someone bursting through the door with one of those and annihilating them. Really?
But he
What
would
a
say,
dick.
so he would say though that he would say, and he would be able to back that up, that the AR-15 wasn't the problem. It was the systems in place that destroyed that. I don't agree with that, but I'm trying to understand that point of view.
Well, I'm not trying to understand it. I understand it already. It's ridiculous.
If I start
It's
with that
ridiculous.
baseline, if I start with that baseline, the one point he would make that made me think, okay, in this instance, when we're taking this back to a civil liberty, Second Amendment piece, which it always comes back to, the one point he makes is, okay, when we look at protecting oneself, the government wasn't there, fine. But there's an issue with the guns being in position and how did that could get that gun. But the idea of liberty, and if we were to take it back to let's say a less school shooter situation, let's say we take it back to having a handgun in the house. And this is what I was speaking about with my wife. I can understand somebody wanting to have a handgun in their house to protect themselves, because you can make an argument that anything is a lethal weapon. And a handgun in the house, if regulated properly, as it is in other countries, isn't necessarily dangerous. But we then need to build that conversation out from there. And I think we just need to look at the nuts and bolts of this and not necessarily break down how much of a rat bag he is for having this view.
I'm sorry that I get emotional about this.
Get emotional.
He's an emotional, right?
Well,
I know you want to be able to engage and be nice, but I just can't. First of all, equivalent, sitting there and saying, oh, it'll be a knife. It'll be, that is absolutely and intentionally obfuscating the point. There is only one item that can do what was done at Sandy Hook and at Uvalde, and it is not a knife. It is not a car driving through the school. It is not all these other crap that he's mentioning. I guess somebody could Oklahoma City the place, but basically that's much rarer and much more difficult, and for a variety of reasons, much more unlikely to be pulled off. The thing that happens that causes this are guns of a certain, not all guns, not long rifles, not, handguns with 6 bullets in them that you keep in your house for either target shooting or for your sense of home protection or both, but a certain kind of weapon that has been altered to fire bullets. I mean, even in its unaltered form, an AR-15 is capable of shooting 45 rounds a minute. 45. And people buy it because it's so easily alterable. I mean, that's just restated fact. So he is, first of all, I can't abide that framework. I don't like that framework. I think he's already, trashed something. Now that's one. Two, I can destroy the entire Second Amendment thing in one thing, which I did with my father, which ask anybody on the street. Don't even start with the Second Amendment or guns or any of the rest of it. Would you like your next door neighbor to have a nuclear weapon? No, you would not. Nobody would. There isn't a soul on earth who is sane, who wants an individual private citizen to have that they don't know and aren't personally friends with. Maybe they would want their buddy or their gun club to have one. But if you said, the guy you across the street that you don't know, have no idea, no relationship with, would you like for him to have a nuclear weapon? Of course you wouldn't. We have now acknowledged the principle. We're only talking about a question of degree. It's only a question of degree. There will be some limitation on to keep and bear arms. Individual citizens cannot just have whatever they want, and nobody really thinks so. So the only question is how and where and when do we limit?
And I think that's fair. And I think a lot of times you get in the conversation, and the reason I think maybe I'm engaging this a bit differently is I don't want to turn off people who have that view that well, you find deplorable. I want them to engage, because I think a lot of times we go down that route, and this is where I would disagree with you.
I wanted to be calm, Sean, but you played that for me, and I'm like seriously, we're talking about to sit there. And even if he had just said from the jump, I would have been angry, but I would have said, okay, there's the principled stand. The idea that, the occasional Sandy Hook or Uvalde or the one that really started this all in my mind, I think the one that we all sort of our generation grew up in thinking about and understanding, Littleton, Colorado.
Yeah.
Columbine. That's just Columbine. That's the price of doing business here in the United States. But the funny thing is that you said in response to them, and this is the third point. He said just now, there's nothing you can do about it. The Onion. I just read an article this week about how the Onion, after one of these shootings 8 years ago, 2014. Came up with the headline, there's just nothing that we can do about it. It says only country where this repeatedly happens. Yeah. Because there is something you can do about it. There absolutely is. And you are putting your fingers in your ears and denying it because of some notion that our liberty is tied to your ability to walk around and everybody else's ability to walk around with a goddamn hand cannon. You do not need one to be free. Period. And if that is freedom, I don't want it.
So here's where I would not differ from you, and I don't think I actually disagree with you. I disagree with how you frame the argument, and the reason being,
now I'm angry,
and that's fair. I get why you're angry, and it's something that and I'm a laid back guy as far as how I perceive things, and I think you kind of get numb to. The fact that there was another, I almost made a joke to you. We better record this before there's another shooting. And I was actually going to message you that today before you messaged me saying there was a mass shooting in Philadelphia. And I thought the irony was incredible with that.
Yes.
But when I want to engage this argument, this conversation, I think by going at it in the way that you did in there's a lot of good content there, but I don't think you've delivered any messaging that's going to help convince anybody of your point of view.
No, I completely agree.
Fall down.
Yeah, no. And I think, was it before we started recording that I said yes, or was it while we were recording that I said the left needs to do a better job? But this particular issue is so fraught with emotion. I mean, really, I know you don't have children, but and I don't mean to make it like, oh, well, only people with kids can understand this, because I don't think that's really true. Anybody can close their eyes and imagine the person most precious to you in the world being someplace where they should be having a perfectly nice time in a perfectly safe environment, and some fucking psychopath who has access to something that nobody should have access to. And I say that not because, listen, I was thinking on the way over here, I walked over the car, like, how would I purchase? I mean, here's the problem, right? Let's say you have 3 kids, and let's say, you're a gun lover. So, and we're the family that shoots together and stays together. You go to the target practice every week. And so, of course, you give each one of your that's their 8th birthday present. When you feel that they've reached the age where they can understand, you hand them each a handgun, and now they each have one. And isn't this wonderful? And you go to the shooting range together, and you go, squirrel hunting together, or whatever it is you do with your guns. Wonderful, right? Here's the problem. Let's say you got 2 kids who are absolutely great rule followers. They keep the ammunition separate from the gun. They keep it, the gun locked away, the trigger lock on, blah, 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 blah. They do everything they're supposed to do. Magnificent. Then you have the 3rd kid who likes to use his gun to open his soda can and other wildly irresponsible things. Shoots neighborhood cats because he likes to watch them die. You could say, oh, well, here's a simple way to handle that. I'll say to the 3rd kid, well, you're obviously not responsible enough to have a gun, so you can't have it. But all the law-abiding children in my house can. Here's the problem. He lives in the house too. You take away his gun, you don't think he's going to be able to get the other 2? Yes, he will. You know what I mean? And maybe he doesn't shoot neighborhood cats until he shot the neighborhood cat. And now or the neighborhood dog, or one of your own kids. And speaking of, there's no taking it back. Now there is no taking it back, sir. It's done. And it's done because you allowed it in your home. Now, obviously, that's a small analogy, but if you think about it in terms of your home instead of the country, and how one of your own kids could be shot by another of your kids because you as the parent can't be everywhere at once. You can't follow one kid around and make sure he's not using his gun to shoot people at every minute of every day. Or if you do see him, like, oh, he's already got to fire at least 1 bullet. So he killed, maybe I saved the 2nd child. Maybe the one murdered the other, but because I had my trusty gun nearby, I killed my own kid before he could kill my other kid. But at least one is already dead. It's
Do you think?
ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Do you think though, if you were just playing devil's advocate, do you
Yeah.
think that argument is a bit hyperbolic?
No, I don't. Not at
So
all. Because it's the exact same thing. All I did was localize it instead of, because it's easy to talk about liberty. Oh, well, it's, like liberty, because liberty is a theoretical, you're talking about broad theoretical concepts and about whether or not theoretical children are worth the theoretical concept, because they're not your children. None of your children were shot and killed. I'd like to hear him sing that song after someone bursts into his kid's school and assassinates his child. Really? Really?
But here's why I'm saying that may be a bit hyperbolic, because you're let me finish.
All right.
Finish. And I appreciate why you're making that argument, and that is a narrative that could very well happen. But if we were to take a step back, you're creating a narrative to make a point, and I don't know that that's going to win hearts and minds, because there's going to be people who are, quote, those responsible gun owners who know more about how they keep and store their guns better than we do, because we've not been educated in how to do that. And they're going to come up with a million reasons as to why that would never happen, or why that could happen with a knife. Which however many serial killers have we come to hear about where they've stabbed and killed cats and things like that. Now, I know that there's not much of an equivalence, and you and I agree on this, between knives and guns, but I don't think making up a narrative is going to win hearts and minds in this instance. It's what people do. You're muted, by the way, in case you didn't know. It's what people do on the other side of the coin that frustrates me. They make up a narrative about how somebody broke into somebody's house, and all the time they shoot the bad guy, and everybody's happy because justice was done. You can make a narrative up to counter any argument.
Well, listen, I don't have to make one up. I can tell you, I've said on this channel before, one of my favorite quotations from Shakespeare: "How oft the sight to do ill means makes ill. How oft the sight to do ill deeds makes ill deeds done." Or how oft the sight of means to do ill deeds makes ill deeds done. What that means is that half of gun deaths every year are suicides. And I had long thought this before. One day I was listening to an NPR coverage of this issue, and this is several years ago now, where the exact story that I imagine plays out many, many times across the country, unfortunately every day, played out. And that's the story that was being told. A young girl, in this case, it didn't work, but I think she maybe finally decided against it, but one way or another, there was a gun in the house, and she was feeling low, depressed, whatever, the way teenagers might, especially, teenagers are famous for their ups and downs, and, you add, there's mental health stuff. I mean, we all know that how much more at risk for suicide adolescent minds are than older minds, typically speaking. In a house with a gun. And I mean, you can say, oh, well, she would have hung herself. She would have thrown the toaster in with herself into the bathtub, blah, 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 blah. I know that's the excuse, but the reality is almost any method of suicide that you can devise is both less reliable and more painful than putting a gun to your head and pulling the trigger. It's over in a second, and it works every fucking time. I mean, every is not quite right. Obviously, I actually knew a kid who shot himself in the head and survived. And in this case, I think the woman didn't do it, but she sat there. Her father was a fierce Second Amendment, supporter. And the whole point of the NPR piece was like, I'm telling you, I was in that house, and the gun, when you're feeling that way, the gun has like a weird, almost like magnetic draw to it. When you start to have those kinds of suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, because there is the simplest, cleanest, and most direct method for accomplishing that thing that we all have. I mean, you can read Freud. Everybody has a death wish, believe it or not. Psychologically, it's buried within us, but it's there. There's some kind of deep, weird attraction to it. And to make it so simple and so easy, and to have it in your home with children, is asking for trouble. And 10,000 deaths a year tell you as much. Half of all deaths are by guns are by suicide. So if you wanted to simply cut down the suicide numbers, you'd get rid of guns. Now, you can say, well, that's the price of doing business or whatever. But to me, it's proof positive that guns it's not A, a made up story. It effing happens. And B, I don't know how else to appeal to people except to say, listen, it's easy to talk in broad strokes about how, well, Yeah, sure. Sandy Hook is the price of doing business, because it didn't happen at your school. It didn't happen to you. Think about it happening to you. Same thing really happened. Just instead of it happened to some other motherfucker, it happened to you. And
So
tell
the
me how
issue-
important that AR-15 suddenly is to you.
But I think I want to stress I agree, and I'm playing devil's advocate because I want to find
play it.
and I want to find, for me, it's finding a methodology where there is some middle ground, because you're doing a really good job of really portraying, how a lot of people feel on the other side. It's almost exasperating to identify what you believe, what I believe is an issue that is fixable. And the reason I come at it, I have a similar view, is I live in the United Kingdom where the data is vastly different. And I'm going to get into that in a second. But I think when you start engaging people about these issues where people are getting shot, they're not focusing on the tool or the gun as the issue. They're focusing on a lot of other things. And I'm trying to understand why. Why is it that the gun is off limits to look at as when we look at data? And the data I want to bring into play, I'm just going to share my screen here again.
I mean, I think what's frustrating, and while you're pulling up the data, is that I don't know anybody. I mean, I think gun rights activists like to play up the notion that people are coming for the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment will never, ever be overturned. That is not on the table. And I don't know anyone who seriously thinks that farmers and hunters shouldn't have their rifles. That even people who, again, you want a 6-shooter for your house or just for target practice or for both, be my guest. You know what I mean? There is an acceptable level of risk in even an automatic 6-shooter, as long as the number of bullets in the stock, you know what I mean, and the availability of them are that there is some effort and time and stopping point to reloading. That's all we want. That's all I want.
Can I stop you though? Because if I were to break down your argument, we were just talking about the unacceptable risk to having a single gun in the house. And we've now made a leap to we're okay with some compromise with having a gun in the house.
Oh, I wasn't saying that you shouldn't. The suicide thing was just to point out that it's a profoundly bad idea, and it's
you can
not
see the
made
numbers
up
here, by the way. I don't know if you can see on the screen. So, just to jump in, I have searched this on the CDC website, so I've actually cross-referenced the BBC's data here, and it is extremely accurate. And what this is saying is 19,384 homicides are gun related. Now, the stats are interesting if you were to compare the US and the UK, because I compared gun deaths, I compared homicide rates between the US and the UK. Now, the difference in the UK, you can have a shotgun, you can get a gun, but there's a lot of hoops you have to go through, classes you have to take, you have to pass you have to be interviewed by a police officer, you have to pass a mental health check. I'm not being too specific because I don't quite know the exact steps, but there is a lot that you have to do. Now, in the U.S., of those deaths, so we have gun-related, so there's 24,576 homicides a year. The 19,384 represent, that's an accurate number, gun-related homicides. So that means about 78% of homicides committed in the U.S. are related to guns. Now, in the UK, and just to give you an idea on homicides, deaths per 100,000 in the population is 7.5. Now, what I struggle with is in the UK, same year as this study, there was 594 homicides. Now, of those, it's deaths per million in the UK. That's 9.9 per million versus the 7.5 per 100,000 in the US. And of those in the UK, 4% of those were firearm related. 4%. So we're talking 36 or something of those are gun related. Right. But we're talking a 10-fold increase in homicides in the US.
That is the issue right there. It's the increase. Because you know what? For the gun advocate people, if the US and the UK had like a comparable number of homicides on a rate basis, so assuming obviously US is a bigger population, but if it were like identical rate basis, that for every million people you had 100 homicides a year. And it just so happened that in the US, that of the 190 were committed with guns, whereas in the UK, 90 were committed with knives or something other, only 10 were committed with guns. I think you would be right to say, well, listen, you have 100 people who were, there were 100 homicides committed in both countries, and someone was motivated to kill somebody else. The U.S. having guns made it easier perhaps for them to pull that off. But just looking at other countries, you'd say, well, someone who's determined to kill somebody is going to find a way to do it. And maybe it would change the rate a little bit, but not much. Like if that's what the stats show, but they don't. They clearly don't. They show that like American homicide rates are way higher. And what's different? Gee, I don't know. Let me see.
And this is the thing, and this is why I tend to really sort of I'm pulling myself away from those emotive narratives because I don't think it's needed. I think really just highlighting, and I think there's a middle ground because there's more guns, and I think this is sort of an understood statistic. There's more guns in the U.S. than there are people. A few other interesting stats. There's been way more mass shootings exponentially by handguns than there are by long rifles. So handguns are way more risky than long rifles.
Yes.
And
well, I don't know if the only reason handguns can be concealed. Okay. I was going to say ultimately, I think they're more convenient. But if you're somebody who's bent on murdering somebody with a gun, and all of a sudden all the handguns went away and you have to use a rifle, I think you just use a rifle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think either way, there's a component there that there's two things I think that I'm and you and I both are contending with if we're debating with somebody. One of which it's that right to protect ourselves. That I have a right. Why should my rights be infringed on because of X, Y, and Z? And the problem I have though is like, okay, this is where the data is starting to tell me that there is now a risk of me living my life as a non-gun owner in the US. I have a right, same as you have a right, you feel you have a right to own a gun. I have a right to not go into a gas station and be shot. Now, looking at the data here, we have, it's not even close. You have a tenfold increase of homicides in the US versus the UK, but it just blows my mind that of those, if there was a way that you can exponentially drop down those, that is squeaky.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Like Christ. So if we were to take a look at those, that 78%, 78% of homicides are gun related. So to me, to be able to ignore, this is what I don't understand. How can you ignore the gun being an issue if the numbers are so drastically different? Now, for me to engage somebody in that conversation, I'm not saying you need to give up your gun. Just have the conversation with me about why there's an 80%, homicide rate using guns, in the U.S. 80%.
I guess this is where you and I differ. This is where you and I differ in that. Bully for you if you have the patience to listen to people grope for explanations, because if you give them the opportunity to grope, they've come in with the premise that it can't possibly be the gun. So yeah, you'll hear them, reach for any possible alternative explanation they can find. These days, it's mental health. Did you see the post I made to Facebook, which is, I think indicative and absolutely true? Before anybody practically knew anything about the shooting in Uvalde, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, started immediately talking about mental health, because we're going to talk about mental health now because a mass shooting has happened. Meanwhile, it's perfectly, relevant fact, Texas spends less on mental health on a per capita basis than almost any state in the United States. Mm-hmm. But today, all of a sudden, we need better mental health resources. Mental health is very serious. But he went on to say, to me, absolutely flabbergastingly, astoundingly, but this is how desperate they are not to ever have the gun be the issue.
Yeah.
Without having any real context yet. We're talking about day of. He said, anybody who shoots anybody is suffering from a mental health issue. Every defense attorney in the goddamn country should be having a field day with that. Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, so anybody who should, first of all, if I was planning on stabbing my wife, I should change it and shoot her, for the insurance money, because now I have a mental health issue. And who says so? The fucking governor. You know what I mean? It's, I have no patience for it anymore. I don't need to hear the bullshit that they're going to shovel, because the only thing that they know is that the gun can't possibly be the answer. Yes, it can, and I don't want to hear. I'll give this guy that you just showed credit in when once the knife thing just pissed me so far off. I couldn't. I even if he had led with the idea that I don't care about how many people die every year, because absolute maximization of personal freedom to do whatever I want at any minute is more important than, yes, even Sean, you're right not to be shot, because that's the price of freedom. I think that's insane, but it's honest. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It is saying basically, I'd rather live here and take an exceptional risk of being shot comparative to anywhere else in the world, if I had the free choice to do it. And of course, there's a problem with setting it that way, because most people don't really. I know you moved abroad, but most people don't really have the choice, quote unquote, to say, I don't like the gun situation in the United States, so I'm just going to pick up and move to France. You know what I mean? It's not the way the world.
It's not an option. But this is my point, though. I don't know that people realize, when I listen to these conversations, I don't know that people realize the gulf in difference in what it's like to live in other parts of the world. And I think the conversation needs to be had around, the Second Amendment, fine. We can debate the Second Amendment, but laws evolve because people evolve. The technology has evolved. The production of and use and the culture of guns has evolved. And I think the most important thing isn't about. I think when we have this debate, there's a sense that when I listen to you make a case that I agree with, the way you make that case, I think you've pretty much killed any opportunity to try to win somebody into your camp.
I mean, you might be right, but you know what I mean? Like,
I
just no longer see it as, and this is the problem. And I think this is where a lot of people on the left are at. And I know I spoke eloquently about trying to win hearts and minds. But this issue,
you lasted 15 seconds. I will give you credit. You lasted 15 seconds.
You can't win hearts. I mean, I know this is old hat here. We both like Jim Jeffries, the Australian comedian. I don't think it was him, though, but somebody said, basically, I knew nothing would ever change in the United States when the worst possible thing happened. That was Sandy Hook, and nothing changed. And so it happened again in Uvalde, and it will just keep happening forever, I guess. And it's infuriating. And to me, I think we need to go down to a more elemental discussion, frankly. I mean, we take it down another level, which is to start asking ourselves, what is the meaning of liberty and freedom?
Yeah.
What are those things? To me, liberty and freedom means that and I think this is what if you want to talk about original intent, this is what the founding fathers. Because all these Second Amendment people, of course, they love original intent because, and they're right. The Second Amendment says, I'll freely say, and like that's actually why I don't think the left's best argument is the idea that, well, technology's evolved and yeah, but the words are what the words are, and they're approved and they're written into law. Unless you change the law, it's not going to change. And it says very clearly that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Not just, and depending on how you read the word infringed, I could go grab my Oxford English Dictionary. Infringed doesn't necessarily just mean that you'll have the right to bear a gun. It means like not even like limited in any way. I mean, you could read it that way, saying it's not just a question of like, okay, you can have a handgun but not a nuke. It might mean actually you can have whatever fucking weapon you personally want. If you can afford a cannon, if you can afford a nuke, if you can afford ICBMs in your backyard, then have at it. Maybe that's what the Constitution actually means. And until we change what it says, that's what it is. I actually have more sympathy. Like, I think the left has a hard time with that argument. What I would say, because I think that that's the issue. What I would say is that, well, all right, go ahead, because I lost my train.
Let me, and I think you bring up an interesting point, because for me, it's identifying that there is a difference in the world with the U.S. and everywhere else, a gulf, a huge sea change in how homicides and how deaths are between the U.S. and, let's say, the U.K. And I'm trying to understand that liberty conversation, because it's almost like with that Second Amendment, that whole piece, that gun piece, we seem to forget about the other things we're okay with. So one of the things I looked up in Texas, if we look at Uvalde, can you still hear me, by the way? I hit my wire.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If we look at Uvalde, the gentleman who bought the gun, he bought the gun when he turned 18. And I just had a look at Texas gun laws. And I think, generally speaking, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on this. If you're 18, Texas won't deny you a gun. Once you're 18, you're good to go. You can have a gun, you can open carry, boom, you're off and running. And I think this is where I start to struggle, because in the right to bear arms, I don't see why adding additional layers of education and checks to make sure somebody is, educated, aware, and prepared to use and manage and handle a gun, why that's a limiting factor, why that is preventing you from having a gun. Because for me, if I were to, one of the things I went to in Texas to find an equivalency is this: how to apply for a Texas driver's license. Because this is not something I've ever heard anyone in Texas bitch and moan about when it comes to driving a car. And I'm going to play a clip in a bit from another channel that's it's commented on one of your I guess views on our Kyle Rittenhouse video. But how to apply for a Texas driver's license. So you need U.S. citizenship, Texas residency. You need to confirm your identity. You need to take a test or 6-hour adult driver education course. Now, this is unheard of, to ask somebody in Texas to do this with a gun. And I don't understand why this is okay, but it's a problem when it comes to a gun, which they'll make the equivalency that cars can kill people. I can mow people down. So, why should a gun be demonized? Well, we already make you take a driver education class. We make you take a test. We make you go through a licensing and registration process. Why is that okay with a car?
And I think I've made similar arguments from time to time, on this channel. And I generally, like, when I'm feeling more sane, and listen, I'm emotional this week, like a lot of people are, I guess, because first of all, a bunch of children were killed, and I'm a father. And second of all, last night in my city, again, it's less theoretical now than it was yesterday, because I've been on South Street many times, as I'm sure you have.
Yes.
When I was in my 20s, I was there a lot.
I think the location took me back in that one, because we used to go down there.
Yeah,
we used to go down there and hang out.
Absolutely. And, so I'm feeling more emotional about it today. But, like, in general, I think I agree with the idea. And I said when I was on the campaign trail that to some degree, I actually see gun clubs, if you're going to have legalized guns, so like the NRA or whatever, people get together at a shooting range or what have you, is actually being constructive if those people bring the right attitude to the enterprise, which is to say that the gun, owning a gun, is not like a political act of defiance against the government. The government, in fact, you live in one of the few governments that allows pretty wide-ranging gun ownership, so you shouldn't be opposed to them at all. What you should be therefore willing to do is cooperate with the government insofar as, for example, and I said this on the campaign trail, like, I have my old computer back behind me, my Commodore 64 or 128. I have a hobby for old computers. I like them. And anybody who participates so do I. And anybody who participates in any kind of hobby, that person, like if you go to group meetings, things like that, and participate in a community, you eventually meet that person who's a little too into the hobby. I don't care what the hobby is, whether it's, computers or My Little Pony or whatever, someone whose obsession with it has gone past healthy. And knowing who those people are when we're talking about guns being the hobby before they've done anything and keeping an eye on them, that would be a useful exercise. And who are the best positioned to know who those people are? Other gun enthusiasts. So I'm not really like, I think training, like proper training, proper handling all makes sense, that kind of stuff. I don't see why. And I don't know how many people are really opposed to that. Like if you brought it down to brass tacks, the NRA spends a lot of money to keep it out, but that's the thing. A lot of these things actually poll quite well, like universal background checks. Yeah. Like 70, 80%. And this is, and you can sort of the conversation of like, how can 20% or 10% of the population control what is or isn't happening within a government? And sometimes that's to the good, because frankly, sometimes, it's easy to whip up populist anger about something. And that's the idea of a republic, frankly, is to prevent reactionary reactions to things and cause time and pausing for thinking about whether or not, just because this thing that happened yesterday, whatever it might be, that today we need to overreact and do 700 things, because maybe some of those things will have worse consequences than the thing itself, That
And
is
that's a
by
bit of a straw man, really. I mean, like you create a narrative that isn't realistic to sort of shoot down any sort of constructive conversation. We can't have this conversation because of this extreme situation.
Mhm.
And I wanted to kind of get into that point with background checks because the gentleman on the right, and I'm going to be respectful. He commented on our channel before, and I started watching some of his stuff. And the reason he intrigues me is similar. Well, he's a larger channel. He's got 750 subscribers. He's going down. He started with Kyle Rittenhouse, and his videos are very much going down the route of gun control, or he calls them gun grabbers. And he's indicative of that person that we would very much disagree with. He's fairly civil. Someone you can have a conversation with. I think I'm debating whether reaching out to the guy to engage with him on our channel. But some of his views are just, no disrespect, Johnny, I just can't get on board with him. And in this video and these three guys did a good job of having sort of differing opinions and being able to have a normal conversation without blowing up at each other. I appreciated that.
Well, their opinions also weren't all that different from one another. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of
there was a lot of equipment. Yeah, they didn't have someone like you or I on there who would probably disagree with most of what they were saying. There were some things I agreed with more or less, and they weren't as extreme as saying gun grabbers, people out trying to take your guns. Johnny's more on that extreme side of things, and there was a few things I stamped I wanted to listen to. Wanted to give you a chance to have a shot back because he called some of your views on Kyle Rittenhouse kind of dumb, but I thought it'd be fun to play. So from 101 this point, he's going to talk about gun control, and he's going down that slippery slope argument, which I hate. Slippery slope. The slippery slope conversation is a load of shit anyway, which he doesn't necessarily call it a slippery slope, but that's kind of what he's going down.
I'm going to give you something that my ex-wife taught me, which to her credit, you can always fire back. That's the fallacy of the beard, which is the notion that, how many hairs does it take to make a beard? Well, there's no specific number of hairs that it takes to make the beard, but that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a beard. So you know what I mean? Like people say, oh, it's a slippery slope, so it doesn't. No. There is still it's still a thing. You know what I mean? The beard idea is that just because I can't tell you that it takes 765 hairs to make a beard, but that if you only have 764, now you only have mutton chops or whatever. Doesn't mean that beards don't exist, right? So anyway, that's to me the counter to the slippery.
Well, even and I think I've never heard that. I really like that.
No, I never heard it either. It's she studied formal logic, and it's one of those things I wish I had done myself. And one of the things they teach you besides formal logic is like the names of various there are fallacious argumentative strategies, and that's one of them. Appeal to authority is another, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it's a good one.
even for me, slippery slope is using that argument as saying we've never drawn a line or as a society agreed on a line, and that whole idea that if we give this much, it means we're now opening up that much more. And I understand the argument, but there's always got to be a line that you have to draw as a society somewhere. There's never any sort of precipice that you're standing on saying we either jump or we don't. But he talks about his view on gun control, and then at about the 102 minute, he then goes into background checks. And I just wanted to share his view on this. If I can hit play.
About the fact that there is just so many people that really want to take all gun rights away, and that prevents.
Now that's the first sort of. Is that a straw man? Would that be a straw man?
Oh yeah.
Because I don't know.
He needs to show me who. First of all, that's impossible. You know what I mean? As you pointed out, there are more guns in this country than there are people. If you want, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that I was a complete totalitarian sort who said, at least with respect to guns, that I want all guns, period guns. I want them uninvented. I don't want any gun in the hand of any private citizen, period. And I had the means. I had enough control of the government that I could just wipe out. I could take the Constitution and flush it down the toilet, and I could just make my will be so. Even with both of those advantages, both the desire and the having trashed the Constitution, I still couldn't do it because what am I going to do? Send residence by residence troopers into every house to find every gun and expect that that's going to actually work? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's what I don't understand is when we, and I think Johnny Walker in this, I'll just call him Johnny. I think he does believe that. I just don't understand where that idea comes from, because I'm sure there's people that say out there, I want all guns gone. But it's such a small percentage of people that, and it's not generally the consensus of what people want. So I think that's a bit of a straw man, and I think it's a way to sort of shift the narrative in the direction you want to shift it.
There's no trust. So when somebody comes along and says,
Sorry, Dixon, did you want to add on to that?
I mean, I guess I would just agree that it's, yeah. I think if you're wondering about the source of it, where does it come from? I mean, I think it comes from places like, well, I mean, the bodies that drive narrative around this. So whether that's the Republican National Committee or the NRA or other lobbyist groups or people who are, whose job it is to create and drive narrative. I mean, you get those people tend to exaggerate things. I mean, on both sides. That's not a left or right. That's not owned by the left or right. Whatever the issue is, on the left, it's like, oh, they're going to ban all abortions. They're going to throw women. And there are some people out there, undoubtedly, that's actually probably more true than the gun thing. And there are probably a handful of people who really want. But you know what I mean? Like, it's not the people because the people who want you to donate money. I mean, I'm on a lot of political email lists. They're all Democratic, right? And I mostly ignore. I used to actually write emails for my campaign. I tried once anyway, like parody, like those kinds of ads, like, oh my God, the world is coming to an end. And if you don't do this right now, they're going to do this, that, and the other. Give us $5. That's where it comes from, though. Yeah. But people will believe it.
Well, hey, here's a really good law that would help things. Your first reaction is, oh, okay, yeah, we know what you're really after. And a lot of times they'll admit it. And so this is that foot in the door kind of thing. And that's the reason why so many people are so hesitant to adopt many of these changes, is because ultimately, once you can breach legally that door, now you have, precedents to move forward. And you know what happens over time. You lose more and more rights. I'm a big gun owner, so I have a different perspective on it. But, I mean, we're always worried about it. For example, universal background checks. Yeah, okay, sounds great. And I'll look at it this way. If you guys want to do universal background checks, fine. Tell the local law enforcement what the problem is with this dude. Is he domestic violence abuse or whatever? Go down and get a court order. If you don't want him to be able to buy a gun, get a court order. And I would be absolutely happy with it. But as soon as you say that, all of a sudden, the support for that drops. Why? Because they want to be able to negate a person's right to buy a firearm based on anything almost. I mean, and so if you've been accused of domestic violence, they want to be able to take away your constitutional right with no due process. And I have real issues with that.
I struggle to understand the point. There's a few things I struggle with that. One of which the whole argument, and this is where I go back to the data. The whole argument ignores the nature of the problem or the scale of the problem. It's just focusing on the rights of the person with the gun, not the rights of the people that are at risk of getting shot necessarily. But there's again, I feel like that's a bit of a straw man. You're saying I support universal background checks, and then I think he conflates that with, I forget what it's called, the red flag laws, where you can cite somebody having posted something on Facebook to a magistrate or something to a judge, and then they can ban you for a year from buying a gun. And he's then saying, if somebody accuses you of sexual assault or something to that effect, they can then, prevent you from getting a gun. And I'm just trying to figure out why that would be an argument against background checks, conflating red flag laws and background checks. I don't understand the argument. Did that make any sense to you?
Actually, it did, which is funny. In that, due process is. See, I think that he's warmer there than the other guy was, with just talking in broad strokes about the price of freedom. These things are going to happen. I mean, it's just that's so callous. I mean, because it's so theoretical about people's kids. This is more like you're talking about two pretty, due process of law. Like, I mean, you start from the premise, it's legal to own a gun, right?
Yeah.
So if it's legal to own a gun, then, if you're going to put in the except, under A, B, C, D, E, F, G circumstances, the idea of due process is that, somebody said, I took a swing at them. I say, no, I didn't. And what that means now, I don't have like a mere accusation can stop my right to possess something. I actually kind of get that, because I do think it's dangerous to start punishing people. I mean, that's the whole notion of the court system, right? Is that, until the legal process is complete and you have a guilty verdict, you're not guilty, and you should be treated as such. And I wonder if he, on the same, there are some very lefty positions that I wonder if he would wind up supporting on the same rationale with respect to, for example, bail and the way bail works in this country, because bail is punitive for a lot of, you think about like when you talk about bail, you think, $50,000 cash or bond. Well, bond means you only pay 10%, but that's 10% you don't get back. If you didn't commit the crime and you're a relatively, even me, to raise $5,000, like somebody accused me of something, I'm arrested. And now if I put up 50 grand, my house or what, if I had 50 grand to put up, then I get it all back. No problem. But if I, if I'm not, if I make all my court appearances and whatnot. But if you just pay the bond, you're paying bond. I mean, that's outright, and people are making profits off that, and it's really unfair to people. You know what I mean? And it's a pre-conviction punishment essentially for having been accused. So, I mean, I can actually kind of get where he's coming from on that. I think this is why the law, the background check law, he's making a decent argument for why some of the it's good in theory, but in practice, how does it actually operate? Because first of all, I mean, people point out, like the guy in Uvalde would have absolutely passed the background check, would have done no good whatsoever.
Well,
right?
there was no background check in Texas anyway.
Right, but if you had one, it wouldn't have made a difference. Same thing with Canada.
But this is not what I'm saying, though. He's conflating red flag laws, which is where a citizen can say this person's a problem and they can be banned from buying a gun for a year, versus just general background checks.
Right.
And where I see the conversation falling down around background checks, so in the UK, you have to show that you've got your shit together mentally, you're capable of handling a firearm, and you don't have a criminal record. You've not beaten your wife before. You don't have any histories of violent crime on your record. We then say we can't have that conversation. We can't look at the best way to do it that's agreeable. We're not even going to consider having the conversation because of this narrative that I've created. So similar to what you were, my problem with your narrative at the beginning, we're making up a story that prevents us from even engaging in the conversation of an agreeable way to have a background check and a mental health check before somebody gets something that can kill a shit ton of people.
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, I'll be fair to my buddy Johnny Walker Dredd here, just to say that he didn't say we couldn't have the conversation. He said these are the red flags it raises for me. I think, to me,
and that's fair.
The bigger issue is, and I think what he's pointing to is like what would make a difference. What would make a difference is really limiting the availability of multiple round magazines. And not just the availability, because yes, there'll be people out there, altering, but like
he would disagree with that, I think.
I'm sure he would, but holding gun manufacturers accountable to make sure that their guns are not. Now, I mean, it's one thing to say that they're not, but on the other hand, like I don't know how possible it is to construct a gun in such a way that if you try to alter it in any way, it's busted and it's no good anymore. That would be the ideal gun to me. It can only be used for the purpose designed, rolling off the factory line. And therefore, the only ones legal to sell are ones that really limit the amount of ammunition that can be processed within a certain amount of time to legitimate uses. So 6 to 10 shots maximum. is another way of saying that. Because, if you're firing at an animal, you get off 2 at best and they're gone. If you're firing at a target, you have plenty of time to reload. There's no issue, for practice. If you're firing at a human being trying to get it, if you haven't killed them within 10 shots, either you're dead or they are. But you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what to say, right? There's no reason for someone to need more than 10 rounds in a single magazine. And I know you can say, well, you could just have like a quick reload. Those are the technologies that need to go. Like a 10-shot revolver or even an automatic that feeds, but then requires like some level of effort like you need to stop someone's ability to walk in and fire the number of rounds these people can fire, whether it's Las Vegas or Virginia Tech or any of these places. And I know none of this is going to be perfect, and I know it's not going to stop whatever, but we'll at least feel like we did something that makes some degree of sense and that doesn't really infringe, because then you can have all the guns you want. You can have, I understand, like, okay, so I have 7 guns in a bag. Well, that's a little bit hard. That's why people don't bring rifles to do their mass shooting, because they're hard to transport. You have to bring 7 guns instead of 1. Like that's good. That's good. I want the law-abiding people. That was the point of my story, is that, like the dad I would like, forget guns. Let's say it's ice cream. Let's say I got 3 kids and I like to give them ice cream every day, but the one kid likes to wipe the ice cream all over the walls. And I say, well, I don't give him ice cream, except that every time all right, he doesn't get an ice cream and the other 2 do. But the problem is he lives in the house with the ice cream, and he has an obsession with taking the ice cream and spreading it all over the walls. So if the ice cream's in the house, he's going to do it. Eventually, I have to say, I know it sucks, but eventually I have to say, I'm sorry, we can't. What am I going to do? Beat the kid, kill him, sell him to the gypsies, or say nobody in this family can have any goddamn ice cream because asshole here can't figure out how to, and that's the reality, and it sucks. And this is Jim Jeffries' point, but he's absolutely on point. Some things are simply too dangerous to leave to the, chance of because unfortunately there will be the asshole in the crowd. And if you're talking about ice cream, that's silly. You'll take the risk that you have the person who's obsessed with spreading ice cream all over your nice paint job.
Yeah.
The gun is, people are dead and children are dead. There's no, and I don't mean to be mean to Johnny Walker Dredd or take his fun away. I'm sorry that it's this way. I would love a world where you could have handguns on every street corner and no one would ever kill each other because no one would ever occur to someone that's what you would use it for. That would be lovely. It just isn't that way.
And this is why I think I don't necessarily agree that the way forward is finding some sort of technical solution to change how guns work for people, because you can't do that on a mass scale. Because at the end of the day, the guns that are being manufactured for military, for use in actually protecting police or protecting military, those guns are still going to be manufactured. And I don't know that I appreciate what you're saying and why you're saying that. But I think, for me, it's looking at examples of other countries. Canada I was going to use as an example, but they've really sort of cranked down, and they've, I think, frozen handgun sales in the last week.
Yes.
But you look at countries like Finland or even Israel, or there's quite a few countries out there where there's a high per capita gun ownership, and they have extremely low levels of homicide. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that guns are linked to service or what do they call it? National service. Mm-hmm. And people in those countries that have guns are highly trained, highly regulated as far as who can have them, whether they're capable mentally of dealing with that. I mean, there's a lot of checks and balances in that, and that protects this. For me, what I get concerned about, I went to a rifle range to shoot clays, and what threw me off a bit was the fact that when I rocked up, it was almost like a golf driving range, and people were just sort of shooting out into the field, and I was parked right behind them. And I know, from a mental health perspective, it doesn't take much for somebody who was mentally stable to become mentally unstable. And it put me off that, there's a lot of people just shooting guns out there. And if somebody's on a bad day, or somebody makes a mistake, or somebody has a gun and they didn't go through the proper training, there's so many what ifs I was, going through my head, and how easy it would be for somebody to make a mistake and shoot somebody else. I want to make sure that the people that have those guns I know that they're highly trained, not just hoping that they know what they're doing with it.
I mean, I feel like I go 2 ways on that. On the one hand, generally speaking, I think training is always good no matter what you're talking about. So yeah, I'm like, I'm basically behind that. Yeah. But on the other hand, Like, let's say the kid in Uvalde was also highly trained. How many more kids would be dead because he had good training too? You know what I mean?
But that's the thing though. He was 18. He would have been. There's a training component, but and I think in that
You see, like, the training's not in and of itself the answer, because
that's an 18-year-old should not have, but an 18-year-old shouldn't have a high-powered rifle. Somebody who's just coming out of high school, because there is a theme.
What do you want to do? Like raise the age to 21?
Well, I mean, these are transactional conversations that are worth having, but
right. No, I mean, I'm just asking you a question. Is that what you?
Yeah, I would say 21 definitely. I mean, or at least some sort of a system where I don't know. This isn't an easy question to answer, but I would definitely say, an 18-year-old should not be able just to rock up in Texas and get a gun, especially an 18-year-old who's out of high school. High school's not easy.
Yeah,
but it's that, I think for me, it's that resistance, because there is a line that, like Texas, for example, there is a line that you can draw in what is and is not appropriate. There's a part of me that almost feels like it's a nuclear weapon type strategy. You just say, fuck it. Missiles are legal. You can buy a tank. Go nuts. Just to sort of get the point across that there is a line that can be drawn. In Texas, the one thing I saw, fireworks. Fireworks are only legal to buy 1 week or a couple weeks out of the year. And only people that are licensed and regulated can sell fireworks during that time. So for some reason, Texas can make a decision on the safety of fireworks, but guns are sort of off the table. So again, there's a false equivalence there. I don't know if that's the right word, or maybe they're going to say I'm making that false equivalence, but there's a problem with equating those two things. They're very related to me, and I don't understand why we can say, well, guns fall under this Second Amendment piece, therefore they're not worth having a conversation on safety. But we can have that conversation with fireworks, and we can have that conversation with cars. Right. Because if we look at this, I want to bring up the other video from Johnny that he mentioned, because he talked about in his video why he doesn't, why he's opposed to further regulation. And it goes back to the same conversation that Nick Recato was having as far as other things. And I this was the thing that I think I struggled the most with as far as his example.
Quite a lot. No, I don't particularly say anything,
My feeling about it is that, we haven't hit the new wave. The new wave, and this is my prediction, but I think that the future is going to be running people down with vehicles. I think that's going to be I think that's what they're going to be starting to do, because, and I hate to promote anything like this because you don't know who's listening, but I only have a few subscribers. Hopefully nobody's going to look at that and say, hey, that never thought about that. But, I don't understand how that has not become a thing, because you have Grand Theft Auto, you have the video games. And this is really personal when you get to run somebody over and you have a crowd of kids and there's nothing that you can do about it.
I want to sip of that.
But you can't do.
I really struggle with that.
I don't know what point he's making. That's a little like, I'm sorry that now. Listen, pal, my buddy Johnny Warrior, he's kind of like orbiting Mars for me now. I don't know what he's talking about.
I think there's, and this is something I've heard in a few other. I might do a show next week where I watched Dan Crenshaw speak to Joe Rogan about this, and I was thinking of, just having us play it out and comment on it. But I've heard this a lot in the last 24 hours, making equivalents to guns to cars, and the problem with that is we regulate cars. We make sure people that can get in cars are educated on how to drive them safely. And if they're old and senile, we take away their right to drive a car. But then if we were to take it to another degree, we can't just go and kill people with cars. And it's not as if cars are like new. Cars have been around for 70 years or more. So why is it that this is the new wave? People are going to take away guns and now they're going to try to drive the car in a school a la Blues Brothers in the mall. I really struggle with that whole idea. And then the final point
go ahead.
is the video game point There's video games in every Grand Theft Auto is one of the most popular games in the world. There are video games outside of the
It's
US.
like 20 years old, isn't it?
In fact, I think Japan is a bigger gamer culture than the US. And yeah, people, there is vehicular homicide, but if you look, I couldn't
Very
find
rare.
data
Vanishing.
in the homicide record on vehicular homicide. It was
That's
so
not a
infrequent.
way to be. You know why? Very simple. It's if I wanted to kill you, why wouldn't I run you over with a car? I can think of two reasons immediately.
I can
One,
step behind a pole. I don't.
yeah, I might not succeed. And two, in the process of not succeeding, I could very well kill myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if I don't do it right. So it's extremely rare. And I'm sorry, Johnny Walker, there, but I don't really know what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I just,
but,
and I don't mean to pick on you, Johnny. I
well,
thought I
mean, the
would.
process point, I was with them there. You know, I get it. But that one.
But Johnny, I just want to point out, I chose you because you engaged with me on our Kyle Rittenhouse video. I think you're somebody that we can have a dialogue with on this. I just don't understand that point of view, that video game point of view, that, you know, this is the next thing coming. And what I struggle with is in all of these conversations, nobody is acknowledging the fact that where there are more guns and more accessibility, there is a tenfold increase in deaths. And I don't know if it's they're ignoring that or it's something that just nobody's really highlighted that, hey, look, outside of the US, people have all the freedom in the world they want. They even get free healthcare and they're not dying at the rate that they're dying.
Let's talk about that because that is something, you know, and I think it's a good place to circle back around to is that freedom question. Because I raised that earlier. I got a little sidetracked in the Second Amendment, the reading of the Second Amendment, how there's that freedom that's kind of baked in the Constitution. I don't think that sometimes left wants to say, oh, well, you know, technology's evolved to the Constitution. The problem is that, yeah, I get it. Technology evolved, but, you know, the law is the law. And you have that element. I think that's a harder logical bridge to gap to say, like, we should read this differently now because, you know, the technology changed. I mean, I'm sympathetic to it, but it's not manifest necessarily. It's also not obvious. And that could be used in ways that the left would both like and dislike. You know what I mean? Like it's a dangerous game to start reading the law the way you want to read it as opposed to what it says. You know, and I mean, there's always they sound a little bit closer to Antonin Scalia than I would like. However, you know what I mean? Like there is some underpinning logic to that position. But with respect to freedom, you know, to me, first of all, there's a brilliant man named Isaiah Berlin who wrote a great book about, you know, he's a professor in political science. And yeah, I have a book I'll be happy to loan it to. I'd recommend it. I can't think of the title of it at the moment. But, you know, he's writing about freedom. And really, and in fact, actually, I've heard about it because I read a book about the Civil War by James Patterson, which is very famous here. It's a bestseller about the United States Civil War. It's a 1-volume study of it. And in the last chapter, he kind of talks about, and he refers to Isaiah Berlin, that's how I got to Berlin, about the distinction between freedom from and freedom to. And most of the people who are on the Second Amendment types are all into the freedom to and the libertarian types. My freedom to own a gun, my freedom to drive a car without a license. You know, real libertarians like don't think you should have to be licensed by the government. If I want to drive a car and I can drive it, I should be able to drive it. My freedom to say what I want, do what I want, as long as it doesn't infringe on somebody else's freedom to say what they want and do what they want, etc. Right? But you know, there's also this notion of freedom from, which, by the way, FDR actually, you know, tapped into very eloquently in not so well known, but right at the end of his presidency, right before his death, he kind of tried to introduce a second Bill of Rights. And whereas the first Bill of Rights is all enumerating your freedom to do this, your freedom to own weapons, your freedom to speak, your freedom to practice religion, your freedom to, he wanted freedom from poverty, freedom from lack of health care, freedom from the fear of being shot in a public space. You know, not that that was one of them, because back then it wasn't a thing. But there are two distinct kinds of freedoms. In other words, there's my freedom to exercise personal agency to essentially satisfy my id and do what I want to do when I want to do it, the way I want to do it right fucking now. That's freedom too. But freedom from is just as important. You know, because people, I think, are way too dismissive. And I understand, you know, like I'd start to hear people saying, like, his whole Franklin Delano Roosevelt, you know, is obviously, I I'm sure our pal Johnny Walker is not a fan because he introduced things like Social Security and the National Work Recovery Act, National Recovery Act with the National Works Program, but all this was supported by heavy taxation. And so, of course, taxes are seen as an infringement. That's the government taking my money. That's a sort of government infringement on my freedom to enjoy the fruit of my labor. But when it's redistributive, rather than simply going to the government so, like, I don't know, can enrich, it's not just paying government salaries and buying things the government wants, but when it's like, I'm going to take this money and now I'm going to like build a bunch of roads and bridges just in order so that, it was the middle of the Depression. The reason it was done was so that, and it wasn't just building roads and bridges. Some of the work, arguably, more than arguably, didn't need to be done per se, but what people needed were jobs, because poverty is just as crushing a circumstance as, to your personal freedom as the inability to say President Roosevelt sucks a dick. You know what I mean? Like it's, if I'm free to say that, but I have to eat beans from a can if I can find a can opener because I can't afford one, what's my freedom worth? You know what I mean? Like, and that was the question they were facing in the Great Depression. And so you're balancing always freedom to and freedom from. And part right now is what you talked about. My freedom from, I should have a right. We should all have a right to be able to send our children to school and have a freedom from seeing them shot, freedom from fear that's not a safe space. Not the snowflake lefty liberal, you said something that hurt my feelings safe space, a literal safe space. Yeah. And the answer is not, yes, arming. I know they'd say, oh, well, arm the teachers, have security, blah, blah, blah. No, but you know what? I don't want my kid going into a militarized zone because
can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
Really quick. Not that, because this is something that I wanted to raise. And this is something that Nick Rekieta mentioned, which we stopped because you were getting too unhappy. And what I will say with Nick Rekieta, the reason I think I can explain a bit better why I'm more open to Nick's comments is because he's acknowledging the problem that most people don't in America who are gun advocates, that death is a problem. The problem isn't death, it's mental health. The problem is video games. The problem is all of these other things, but death is not something that's discussed. And it's something that is avoided as part of that conversation. It's never been discussed as a messy thing. But the other component here that it sort of boggles my mind, and I need help understanding it, is why it's okay for schools to be militarized. Why is it okay for me to want to send, if I had a kid, to send my kid in a school where every teacher has a holster and a gun? Because outside of the United States, it's a bit like Shangri-La, where you can send your kids to school and they won't get shot. There's like a 0.00 something % chance in, let's say, Europe that will happen. And in the US, it happens enough that people are worried about it. It happens enough that there's drills in schools that were effective in, what was it, last year in Detroit when that kid, I forget his name, his parents bought him a gun when he was 15 and he went into the school. And what saved lives was the active shooter drills that they had done. It's almost like you're living here in Europe, you're watching a film, like a dystopian film, where we're in this weird futuristic world, almost like Mars in Total Recall. It's like this weird batshit world where that's okay. And that's the thing I don't understand. And it doesn't happen here. And we're okay with making those compromises to have teachers being, armed and ready to take on these active shooters because they're going to come. We're okay with
you speak of Kimosabe. I'm not okay with it.
Well, the royal we. It's those.
I know.
And it's something that just I can't get my head around it, and I need help understanding why we're okay with.
You're asking the wrong cat. We're not okay with it. The royal we here is not okay with it. The royal we here gets very, 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 very angry when he thinks about it. When we think about it.
it's just that engagement. But I did, before we wrap tonight, I did find one video, and it was from somebody who is a gun advocate, but it was kind of an eye-opening video for me. Not that I necessarily agree with that person, but in how he framed the conversation on the issue with guns and the culture around guns. Because I'm not a gun owner, so part of the problem with me engaging somebody about the culture in guns is I'm not part of that culture. So therefore, I'm looking at it from the outside. People are going to look at you and I being a bit sort of holier than thou, but we don't know. We're not in those shoes. And I found this video, and it really stuck with me. Let me get that on the screen here. I'm just going to play a little bit of this.
When one of these kids shoots up a school, where'd he get the gun? 9 times out of 10. Relative, right? Out of their gun cabinet? Somebody in the gun crowd? How many of you got a photo on Facebook dressed like I am right now? Got your plate carrier on, rifle. Show you a killer, ready to kill over anything. Step on my flag, I'll kill you. Can't imagine where some kid got the idea that it might be okay to kill somebody over something trivial. See, you sit there and you throw that out there all the time. You're ready to kill, and then you're surprised when some kid walks into a school, caps a bunch of children.
I love this man. The Cobra Commander logo on his vest.
That shift
I love him
Cobra
already.
was.
Yeah, look at the vest. He's got the Cobra vest on.
Didn't even pick up on that.
Yeah.
Not the rifle. Y'all know that. That's the part about the gun crowd drives me insane. Y'all know that it's not this. Semi-automatics, they've been available to the civilian market for 100 years.
As an aside, the semi-automatic rifles, and since I think 2000, or since the ban, the assault rifle ban ended, has skyrocketed over the last 15 years. But that's neither here nor there as far as that's concerned.
It's only recently that this became an issue. About the same time, this was no longer a tool. And right now, you're like, no, it's a tool. Gun ain't gonna kill anybody by itself. You're right. It's a tool.
I love this point.
I don't see a whole lot of pictures like this, though. No, I don't remember anybody. No, it is a tool, but it's the only tool you act like makes you a man. And that's the problem. That's what this has become. It's no longer just a tool. This is a symbol of masculinity. This is manhood. Then think about your response to a school shooting. That kid just needed more discipline. Right? Go ahead and say what you mean, though. You need to be smacked around a little bit more, right? That's what you're really saying. So some kid been picked on a little bit, maybe feels a little bit emasculated because of it, picks up the symbol of masculinity, walks into a school, solves that problem because violence is always the answer. Right?
This guy is fucking brilliant. Can I vote for him?
Because I was just looking at the video after video, and I was searching
What is
for
the
things.
link? Oh my god, I love this dude.
So clearly he's somebody that would disagree with a lot of what we said tonight. But he's framed
but he's better. He's
framed. He's framed. I wanted to save this for last because he's framed the issues that maybe we're not talking about, which is the gun culture. We do talk about it, but we don't understand it. And not that I didn't understand what he's saying, but the way he framed it really hit home for me, because it made me think about when the Second Amendment was written. Guns were 100% a tool. They were there to protect, but they were also a tool. They were a livelihood.
They become a lifestyle. Yeah, no.
But you see that image with I have good trigger discipline and my fingers out, and I've got this rifle here, and it is a symbol of well, he's saying masculinity. It is a culture piece. It's something that defines you. It's something that is a part of you, and you need to have it out. It's not a tool. It's an accessory. And the way he framed that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And it identifies, guns is in America not as tools, but as those accessories and those things, especially with young people, when it becomes part of an identity. I think there's this need or
No,
this desire to make it a part of your person, to use that tool in a way that
I,
maybe, yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to interrupt you.
please.
You're just, he's brilliant. That's
Yeah.
brilliant. He's brilliant. I want to contact Moms Demand Action right now and get him hooked up with them and say, like, listen, you know, we don't have to. That's a great narrative changer. It's like people, you know, the group who is, you know, obviously without profiling too much, people who tend to be very interested in guns also tend to be right of center, right? And so they're into the personal responsibility narrative, and, the idea that everybody's got to be responsible for their own actions. Well, there you go. You know what I mean? Like, be responsible then. Yeah, this is a great find, man. This
Yeah.
guy's.
And I wanted, by the way, that is fireworks outside. I don't know if you can hear that. It's not gunfire.
Oh, I
There's-
can hear that. What's today out there in the UK?
It's the Jubilee. So it is part of a celebration weekend of the Queen. So it was weirdly ironic given what we're talking about, the Second Amendment.
We need our guns.
Ooh. I think we lost Dixon. I don't know. Hopefully we can get him back in here. And I'm going to keep this going. Anyway, yeah, that video here for me. Hopefully we get Dixon back, and hopefully I'm recording and not just talking to the ether. But when I did see that video, it really, I guess, caught me off guard. There he is. Let me get him back into the stream. He's back.
Technical difficulties. Sorry. Yeah, we need those guns because if we don't have them, the Queen of England can come in and push us around anytime she
Definitely
wants.
can. But I was just saying, yeah, I was just sort of going back. I was trying to buy time just to say, yeah, that video. I think for me, it's a narrative that needs to be out there more, because I think when we take a look, when we see the open carry, the rifles out there, I think one, it's people have a right to not feel uncomfortable, and I think when you see those people out there with those rifles, with those long guns, they're not carrying them around because they're necessarily a tool or they're necessarily keeping them safe. I think it's a culture thing, and for me, that just did such an incredible job of highlighting it. And I think he would disagree with a lot of what we're saying, but that argument in itself is something that everybody needs to hear.
Yeah, I agree. Couldn't agree more.
So, where I want to take this, we're going to be covering, I think, more things we're not going to be doing guns all the time, but I wanted to have that conversation again in the next week, and I want us to watch an interview with Dan Crenshaw, who addresses these points on Joe Rogan, and maybe give a follow up to that. But if there's anything that you want to hear us talk about, please let us know. Dix, did you have anything you wanted to add before we wrap today?
No, I apologize for my ranting behavior at the beginning.
No, I'm never gonna. I'm not here to hold you down. I'm not here to. I
wrecked the whole vibe. I know you had this whole vibe planned, and then
no. You didn't wreck it at all. I love it because you're happy for me to disagree. I disagree with that tact, and I don't think it's necessarily that we disagree. I think it's a very emotive issue. Every time we've discussed guns, it's something that I think strikes a chord with you. I think I'm a bit more, maybe because I live in the UK, I can be a bit more analytical about it, or I don't know if pragmatic's the word, but it's something that you are very passionate about, and you have very defined thoughts. And I think my position is I'm trying from a sociological standpoint, just try to understand why people think the way they do, because it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. No, but I mean, Barack Obama said it accidentally, but said it best. In some, no, he didn't say it best, but he said it accidentally, but he was right. In his original campaign for president in 2008, he was talking about, he made a famous gaffe talking to some donors about, somebody had asked him a question about, like, basically, probably framing it something like, what the hell is wrong with these people with their guns and their, right-wing religious, blah, blah, blah. And he was trying to, like, I think, kind of calm the person down, but, it came out and it got recorded. And he said, like, listen, you're talking about a bunch of people who live in areas of the country that have become an economic, if they go back, turn back the generation to when they were kids, especially when their parents were kids, and the place was prosperous, things were better. You know, everyone they knew had a job. People weren't looking to move away, and the world's changing around them, and the Rust Belt's, you know, kind of declining, and everything's scary. You know, in terms of like the way the world just isn't what it used to be, and so. You know, and the phrase he uses that they cling to their guns and their religion, and he didn't mean that to be nasty. Of course, it doesn't sound good coming from him, but you know, like, but I think that there was a lot of truth there. I remember my mom saying she wasn't upset because he was right. That, in other words, people. I mean, it's not just, you know, it's not being mean to observe realistically that people get very attached to that which is familiar when things are changing in ways that they can't control rapidly around them. And so then, yeah, it becomes more, as this gentleman we just saw said, it becomes less of a tool and more of a lifestyle, more of an identity. And when it's an identity, then you're threatening to take away somebody's identity. Yeah, then they become very, very, very defensive.
That's definably conservatism, if I've said that right. You know, you're leaning towards tradition and what you're familiar with, and change is scary.
Yeah, change is scary.
And people who are,
I mean, I think we're all conservative to some degree. I mean, you know, especially as you get older and things are changing, and you realize the world's not for you anymore. It's for the generation rising beneath you, and that your time is, you're basically running out the clock. You know what I mean? You're there kneeling on the football. You know,
I struggle. I mean, I struggle with seeing fat guys in skinny jeans now. I want to tell them it doesn't have to be this way. They look like a, you know, like a roast beef with a string.
We're out and way out here in the U.S., so you guys are lagging behind now.
But yeah, we'll see where we take this. What I'll probably do is I'll probably drop a message into one of the. I'll probably on Twitter drop a message to Johnny, let him know we just to give him the respect that we were reviewing some of his comments, just to see if he has any views on it. Maybe he'll want to jump on a stream with us and talk about his views. I'm gonna let you go nuts if you feel like going nuts, man. I'm never gonna stop you. It's you do you, I do me.
Yeah. I mean, hey, this is all about conflict. This venue, right?
Yeah.
So this medium.
And I think I like that we deal with problems differently, and for me, it keeps us both in check because
I yell a lot.
I've never been that way. I'm very Socratic in my methodology. I like to ask a lot of questions to understand the point.
Mm-hmm.
So that way I know.
There was a time when I was more like that on this issue, but I feel like I've just heard some things ad nauseum, and I've seen the just like I said, the scramble to find anything else to blame but the gun. Yeah. And it's like, well, you know, at a certain point, you know, I don't need to hear you work through that exercise again. I know what you're going to say, and it's wrong. You know, and I'm not waiting until another school gets shot up to say what I have to say. If that's all that I can do.
The beauty is it's going to be in the first 10 minutes. So that's what everybody's going to see. You're going to have that message out there. And I think that's good.
Right. All right. Well,
listen, everybody, thank you so much. We will be back hopefully on a more regular schedule. We're going to be a little bit more relaxed with our content just so we can get more things out. We will still be doing true crime from time to time. But I think we want to expand our horizons a little bit. But if there's anything you want us to hear, let us know. And if you haven't, please like and subscribe, and we'll catch everybody soon. Take care.